It's 7:15 on a cold February morning in Carlton, Georgia. The emergency dispatch center receives a call that will shake this small community to its core. The voice on the other end is barely audible through desperate sobs, a 16-year-old girl struggling to form coherent words as she describes the unthinkable horror she claims to have just discovered. 2 adults lie motionless in their bedroom, multiple gunshot wounds painting crimson patterns across white pillows. No signs of forced entry, no stolen property, no logical explanation for what appears to be a targeted execution in the quiet suburbs of rural Georgia. But this case isn't just about a double homicide. It's about how social media can become a weapon in the wrong hands, and how grief can be weaponized for attention in our digital age. Because the same teenager who made that tearful emergency call would soon transform her tragedy into trending TikTok content, turning her parents' brutal murder into viral entertainment. This is the story of how investigators slowly realized they weren't hunting an external killer. They were watching a performance by someone who may have orchestrated the entire nightmare. Welcome to the investigation of Sarah Grace Patrick. Carlton, Georgia sits like a forgotten pocket watch in the American South, approximately 75 kilometers west of Atlanta's sprawling metropolis. Unlike its bustling neighbor, Carlton moves at the pace of agricultural seasons and Sunday church services. The landscape here tells the story of rural America, sprawling properties separated by dense woodlands, where neighbors might live a mile apart and privacy comes naturally. Georgia's relationship with crime reads like a statistical roller coaster. During the 1980s and 1990s, Atlanta consistently ranked among America's 5 most dangerous cities. Investment and urban renewal programs gradually improved those rankings, pushing Atlanta down to 19th place by 2015. However, this progress masks a troubling trend. Homicide rates have nearly tripled over the past 15 years. While overall crime decreased, murder became more concentrated and more brutal. This context matters because when emergency services received that February morning call, they responded with the heightened awareness of investigators who understand that rural areas aren't immune to violent crime. They simply experience it differently, more isolated, more personal, often involving people who know each other intimately. The property where our story unfolds exemplifies this rural isolation. Surrounded by Georgia pine forests and accessible via winding dirt roads, the family home sat on several acres of land. The nearest neighbour lived beyond shouting distance. Security cameras were sparse. Cell phone towers provided patchy coverage. This geographic isolation would prove crucial to understanding how someone could commit double murder without witnesses, and why investigators eventually focused their attention inward rather than outward. At 7:15 a.m. on February 20th, 2025, emergency dispatch protocols activated like precision clockwork. The caller identification system immediately flagged the address and began routing patrol units, paramedics, and detective supervisors toward Carlton's quiet residential area. The voice analysis software that modern dispatch centers use to assess caller stress levels registered extreme emotional distress. Sarah Grace Patrick's sobbing was genuine enough to trigger automatic priority escalation. Her words, when she could form them, painted a picture that sent chills through experienced dispatchers. My parents. They're not moving. There's blood everywhere. My little sister found them. First responders train extensively for domestic violence scenarios, accidental shootings and suicide cases. They arrive expecting certain crime scene configurations based on initial caller descriptions. What they discovered at the Patrick residence, however, matched none of their standard response protocols. Officer Jennifer Martinez, a 12-year veteran of the Carlton Police Department, later described entering the home as walking into a magazine spread that someone had splattered with blood. Everything downstairs appeared meticulously organized. Kitchen counters gleamed. Children's toys sat neatly arranged. Not a single item seemed out of place. The disconnect between the pristine lower level and the carnage upstairs immediately triggered investigative protocols typically reserved for organized crime scenarios. This wasn't a burglary interrupted. This wasn't a domestic dispute escalated. This appeared to be what investigators call a surgical strike, precise, planned, and executed with specific targets in mind. Keep this crime scene staging in mind. We'll return to its significance soon. Firearms evidence tells stories that human witnesses often cannot. When the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's ballistics team arrived, they began reconstructing the sequence of events through scientific analysis, that would prove more reliable than any eyewitness testimony. Bullet trajectory analysis works like three-dimensional geometry. Investigators use metal rods to trace each projectile's path backward, from impact points to probable firing positions. The mathematics don't lie. Angles, velocity, and tissue damage patterns create a precise roadmap of violence. What they discovered eliminated several theories immediately. Neither victim showed defensive wounds. No gunpowder residue suggested close contact struggles. The projectile angles indicated both victims were likely asleep when shot. Most significantly, the trajectories ruled out murder-suicide scenarios completely. Think of it like this. If someone shoots themselves, the bullet travels along a specific path determined by arm length, weapon position, and body mechanics. These paths create recognizable patterns that ballistics experts can identify instantly. Neither victim's wounds matched those geometric requirements. The weapon itself remained missing. Despite extensive searches of the property, surrounding woodlands, and nearby water sources, investigators never recovered the murder weapon. This absence would become increasingly significant as the investigation progressed. Modern ballistics analysis also examines what doesn't happen. The absence of bullet holes in walls, furniture, or fixtures suggested controlled shooting by someone familiar with firearms. Random violence typically leaves scattered evidence. Precision violence leaves concentrated patterns. This wasn't amateur hour. Someone had planned this carefully. While crime scene technicians processed physical evidence, digital forensic specialists began mapping the family's electronic communications, financial transactions, and social media presence. Modern murder investigations require understanding victims' digital lives as thoroughly as their physical ones. Financial analysis revealed no suspicious transactions, unexplained cash withdrawals, or unusual spending patterns. Phone records showed routine family communications with no threatening messages or suspicious contacts. Email accounts contained typical suburban family correspondence, school events, church activities, medical appointments. However, Sarah Grace Patrick's digital presence painted a different picture entirely. Her social media activity showed someone deeply engaged with true crime content, frequently commenting on murder cases and sharing crime-related videos. Her search history revealed extensive research into famous murder cases, particularly those involving teenage perpetrators. Most significantly, her browser history showed multiple searches for information about gunshot wounds, crime scene cleanup, and police investigative procedures. These searches occurred sporadically over several months leading up to the murders. Digital forensic specialists also discovered deleted text message conversations. While the content couldn't be fully recovered, metadata showed extensive communications with an unknown number in the days immediately before and after the murders. Phone company records indicated this number belonged to a prepaid device purchased with cash, a communication method that suggests deliberate anonymity. Social media algorithms had been feeding Sarah increasingly violent content based on her engagement patterns. Her For You feed contained graphic crime scene photos, detailed murder case discussions, and true crime creator content that glorified notorious killers. This digital diet of violence would prove relevant to understanding her psychological state. Understanding murder requires understanding relationships. Investigators spent weeks mapping the complex family structure that connected biological parents, step-parents, half-siblings, and custody arrangements. Sarah and her younger brother Donnie were products of Kristin's first marriage to Daniel Patrick. That relationship had disintegrated amid allegations of drug abuse, neglect, and domestic violence. Court documents revealed a bitter custody battle that stretched over 3 years, involving Child Protective Services, emergency custody motions, and conflicting testimonies from teachers, counsellors, and family members. Daniel Patrick had fought desperately for full custody, documenting instances where his children appeared neglected, underfed, and showing signs of exposure to illegal substances. Social workers' reports confirmed finding drug paraphernalia in the home during unannounced visits. Sarah herself had written statements expressing fear of returning to her mother's house. However, the custody arrangement had recently stabilised. By 2024, relationships between all parties had improved significantly. Even Daniel Patrick acknowledged that Kristin and James appeared to be maintaining sobriety and providing better care for the children. The 3 parents had been observed sitting together peacefully at school events and sports competitions. This reconciliation timeline became crucial to investigators. If family tensions had decreased, what new stressor might have triggered violence? James Brock's medical condition added another layer of complexity. His cardiac device required constant monitoring and would sound loud alarms if his heart rhythm became irregular. This medical equipment created what investigators call involuntary surveillance. Any significant stress or physical activity would trigger audible alerts. The absence of cardiac alarm activation during the murder timeframe suggested either James remained calm throughout the attack or the device had been deliberately disabled. Medical device tampering requires specific technical knowledge that eliminated random intruder theories. Sarah Grace Patrick's post-murder social media activity represents one of the most disturbing aspects of this case. Rather than withdrawing from public platforms during her grief, she amplified her presence and began creating content that would eventually contribute to her arrest. Her initial Facebook post, written using her deceased stepfather's account, struck many readers as oddly detached. While expressing appropriate grief, the language seemed carefully crafted rather than emotionally raw. She corrected news media details without specifying which facts were incorrect. She thanked supporters while simultaneously promoting her TikTok account for updates. This transition from victim to content creator happened with suspicious speed. Within weeks of the murders, Sarah was producing daily TikTok videos featuring trending audio clips overlaid with family photos and crime scene details. She described her trauma using popular social media formats designed for maximum viral potential. The technical quality of these productions concerned investigators. Rather than simple emotional outbursts recorded spontaneously, Sarah's videos showed evidence of planning, editing, and strategic posting to maximize engagement. She understood algorithm optimization, hashtag strategies, and community building techniques typically used by established content creators. Most disturbing was her direct outreach to true crime creators. Rather than waiting for media coverage, Sarah actively solicited attention from popular crime channels. She offered insider information and described her parents' murders as potentially big hits for creators' channels. This language suggested someone viewing tragedy as entertainment commodity rather than personal loss. Her comment activity on these videos revealed concerning patterns. She corrected details about the crime, provided information not publicly released, and engaged in speculation about suspects and motives. For someone supposedly devastated by loss, she seemed remarkably invested in maintaining narrative control over her story. By July 2025, 5 months after the murders, the investigation had systematically eliminated external threats. Financial motives didn't exist. No evidence suggested drug-related violence. Former romantic partners had solid alibis. Random crime seemed impossible given the crime scene staging. This process of elimination forced investigators to confront an uncomfortable possibility. The killer had been inside the house that night. Only 4 people were present, both victims, 5-year-old Jay and 16-year-old Sarah. Simple logic eliminated everyone except Sarah, but investigators needed evidence beyond circumstantial reasoning. The breakthrough came through timeline analysis. Sarah's various statements about that night contained subtle but significant inconsistencies. In her initial police interview, she claimed sleeping through the entire incident. On social media, she mentioned hearing James's cardiac alarm approximately 20 minutes after going to bed. This cardiac alarm detail became crucial. Medical records showed James's device was functioning normally and would have activated under stress. If Sarah heard the alarm, she was awake during a period when violence was occurring. Her failure to investigate those sounds or call for help suggested either callous indifference or personal involvement. Jay's witness statements, despite her young age, remained consistent across multiple interviews. She described loud booms that woke her during the night. She was certain about hearing these sounds clearly. If a 5-year-old heard gunshots through bedroom walls, a 16-year-old in an adjacent room certainly would have heard them. Sarah's claim of sleeping through multiple gunshots, cardiac alarms, and general commotion became increasingly implausible as investigators mapped the house's acoustic properties and conducted sound level testing. On July 8, 2025, investigators obtained an arrest warrant for Sarah Grace Patrick. The decision to charge a 17-year-old with double murder required approval from multiple levels of law enforcement and prosecution officers. Such cases demand overwhelming evidence because juries naturally resist believing teenagers capable of calculated violence. The arrest itself occurred without incident. Sarah was taken into custody at her father's residence, where she'd been living since the murders. Her reaction, according to arresting officers, seemed oddly calm for someone facing life imprisonment. She asked about her phone and social media accounts before asking about legal representation. Prosecutors announced their intention to try Sarah as an adult, citing the premeditated nature of the alleged crimes and the particularly vulnerable state of the victims. This legal decision means she faces the same potential penalties as any adult convicted of double murder, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The bond hearing revealed additional concerning details. Family members testified that they feared Sarah might flee if released. More significantly, they expressed concern for their own safety if she remained free pending trial. These statements suggested family members believed she posed ongoing danger to people around her. Legal experts noted the unusual circumstances of family members opposing bond for their own relative. Typically, families rally around accused members regardless of charges. The Patrick family's public opposition to Sarah's release suggested they possessed information about her character or behaviour that hadn't been made public. Much of the prosecution's case remains sealed pending trial. However, legal analysts point to several indicators suggesting the evidence against Sarah may be substantial. First, the speed of the arrest. Investigators worked for 5 months before filing charges. This extended timeline suggests they were building a comprehensive case rather than reacting to public pressure. Rushing to charge a teenager with murder would invite legal challenges and public scrutiny that prosecutors typically avoid unless they're confident in their evidence. Second, the decision to try her as an adult. This prosecutorial choice requires demonstrating that the alleged crimes showed adult-level planning and sophistication. Spontaneous teenage violence typically remains in juvenile court. The adult court designation suggests prosecutors believe they can prove premeditation and careful planning. Third, family member statements. The victim's relatives who knew Sarah personally have publicly supported her prosecution. These aren't distant observers reacting to media coverage. These are people who watched her grow up and now believe she's capable of murdering their loved ones. Fourth, the ongoing investigation. Prosecutors have indicated additional arrests may be forthcoming. This suggests either Sarah had accomplices or the investigation has uncovered additional crimes. Neither possibility supports her innocence. This case represents something relatively new in criminal justice. A generation that grew up with social media using those platforms to process, perform, and potentially profit from personal tragedy. Sarah's post-murder content creation raises questions about how digital natives understand the relationship between private emotion and public performance. For someone whose formative years occurred entirely within social media culture, the distinction between experiencing grief and performing grief may have become blurred. Her strategic outreach to true crime creators suggests understanding that murder cases can become entertainment commodities with significant value to content creators. Rather than seeing herself solely as a victim, she appeared to recognize her story's commercial potential within the true crime ecosystem. This behavior pattern concerns criminal psychologists studying the intersection of social media culture and antisocial personality development. Traditional killers typically avoid publicity. They hide evidence, maintain alibis, and distance themselves from their crimes. Sarah's approach represents a different psychological profile, someone who might view murder as content creation opportunity. The viral nature of her grief performance also demonstrates how social media algorithms can amplify and reward inappropriate emotional displays. Platforms that prioritize engagement often boost dramatic content regardless of its authenticity or appropriateness. Sarah's videos received thousands of views precisely because they seemed so raw and disturbing. Despite months of investigation and Sarah's arrest, significant questions remain unanswered. Prosecutors haven't revealed motive, which typically forms the foundation of murder cases. Without understanding why Sarah allegedly killed her parents, the case relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and timeline inconsistencies. The murder weapon's location remains unknown. This absence complicates prosecution efforts because juries expect physical evidence in murder cases. While circumstantial cases can succeed, they require overwhelming evidence of guilt from multiple sources. The possibility of accomplices adds complexity. If additional arrests occur, it might suggest Sarah didn't act alone. Alternatively, it might indicate the investigation has uncovered unrelated crimes or evidence tampering by family members or friends. Sarah's mental health history remains largely confidential, but suggestions of previous psychological treatment raise questions about her competency to stand trial and her emotional state during the alleged crimes. Teenage brains process consequences differently than adult brains, which complicates both legal proceedings and public understanding of her alleged actions. Carlton, Georgia has struggled to process the possibility that one of their own children might be responsible for such brutal violence. The case has divided the small community between those who knew Sarah as a typical teenager and those who now view her past behaviour through a suspicious lens. Local schools have increased counselling resources and implemented new social media monitoring programs. Teachers report heightened awareness of students who seem overly interested in violent content or who display concerning online behaviour patterns. The case has also sparked broader discussions about true crime culture's influence on impressionable audiences. Some community members advocate for age restrictions on violent content, while others argue that censorship won't address underlying psychological issues that predispose certain individuals toward violence. Sarah Grace Patrick's trial will likely occur in late 2025 or early 2026, depending on legal motions and evidence discovery timelines. Georgia's legal system moves deliberately in capital cases, ensuring thorough preparation and multiple review levels. Her defense team faces significant challenges. They must explain away inconsistent statements, social media behavior that appears callous, and physical evidence that eliminated external perpetrators. Successfully defending against double murder charges requires creating reasonable doubt about each element of the prosecution's case. The prosecution's strategy will likely focus on timeline discrepancies, acoustic evidence proving Sarah was awake during the murders, and her suspicious behaviour in the aftermath. They'll paint a picture of a calculated killer who used social media to manipulate public sympathy while concealing her guilt. Public interest in the case remains intense, with social media users continuing to analyse every detail and legal experts predicting the trial will receive national attention. The intersection of teenage violence, social media performance, and family annihilation creates a perfect storm of public fascination. The intersection of true crime culture, social media evidence, and teenage violence has created unprecedented media interest in Sarah Grace Patrick's trial. Court administrators expect requests for media access that will far exceed available courtroom space. Television networks have already begun developing documentary proposals about the case, while podcasters and YouTube creators compete for exclusive interviews with family members and legal experts. This media attention complicates jury selection, as potential jurors may have been exposed to extensive pretrial coverage. Social media platforms face difficult decisions about hosting content related to the case. Sarah's original videos have been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms, creating permanent digital records that could influence potential jurors. Platform moderators struggle to balance free speech concerns with potential prejudicial impact. The case has spawned online communities dedicated to analysing every detail of the evidence and legal proceedings. These amateur investigators often develop theories that lack factual basis, but spread rapidly through social media networks. Court officials worry that these discussions could reach potential jurors despite instructions to avoid case-related content. Legal experts predict the trial will influence future cases involving social media evidence and juvenile defendants. The precedents established regarding digital privacy, expert witness testimony about online behaviour, and jury instruction about social media evidence will shape criminal justice proceedings for years to come. Lost amid the legal proceedings and media attention are Kristen Patrick and James Brock, whose brutal deaths initiated this tragic sequence of events. Their surviving family members struggle to process grief while confronting the possibility that someone they loved and trusted may have been responsible for the murders. Daniel Patrick faces the impossible situation of potentially losing his daughter to life imprisonment while mourning his ex-wife's death. His public support for Sarah's innocence reflects either genuine belief in her character or desperate hope that someone else was responsible. Either way, his position isolates him from other family members who believe in her guilt. 5-year-old Jay Patrick represents the case's most tragic victim. Having discovered her parents' bodies and potentially witnessed her sister's arrest, she faces psychological trauma that will require years of therapy and support. Her testimony, if allowed, could prove crucial to establishing the timeline of events. The extended family members who once embraced Sarah as a beloved niece and stepdaughter now grapple with feelings of betrayal and fear. Their willingness to publicly oppose her bond release suggests deep concerns about her character that go beyond the current charges. Kristen and James's friends and church community struggle to understand how their lives ended so violently. The couple had overcome addiction, and appeared to be building stable lives for their blended family. Their murders represent not just personal tragedy but community loss of two people who had turned their lives around. This case forces uncomfortable questions about how social media culture might influence antisocial behaviour in ways we're still learning to understand. Sarah's generation grew up with platforms that reward dramatic content, personal revelation, and emotional performance. The boundaries between authentic experience and performative content may have become so blurred that some individuals lose the ability to distinguish between them. Criminal psychologists studying this case note similarities to other recent crimes where perpetrators immediately began creating content about their alleged offences. This pattern suggests a potential new category of criminal behaviour driven by social media's dopamine reward systems and attention economies. The case also highlights investigative challenges in the digital age. Social media provides unprecedented insight into suspects' mindsets and behaviour patterns, but it also creates new forms of evidence that require specialised interpretation. Understanding whether someone's online persona reflects their authentic self or represents calculated performance requires expertise that many law enforcement agencies are still developing. As we await trial proceedings, Sarah Grace Patrick's case serves as a disturbing reminder that the most dangerous predators sometimes come from within our own families and communities. The teenagers we think we know, whose content we consume and whose stories we share, may be performing roles more complex and sinister than we can imagine. Whether Sarah is ultimately convicted or acquitted, her case has already changed how investigators approach social media evidence and how communities think about the relationship between online behaviour and real-world violence. In our connected age, the line between victim and perpetrator, between grief and performance, between tragedy and entertainment, has become harder to distinguish than ever before. The courtroom will ultimately decide Sarah Grace Patrick's legal fate, but her case has already raised questions about digital age psychology, social media culture, and criminal behaviour that will influence both law enforcement and social media policy for years to come. This is how a family was destroyed, a community was shattered, and a generation learned that their own children might be capable of unimaginable violence, all while performing their emotions for viral content and turning tragedy into trending entertainment. The investigation continues, the trial approaches, and the questions multiply. In Carlton, Georgia, and communities across America, parents are looking at their teenagers' phones with new suspicion and wondering what performances their children might be planning next.